Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sam Weeks. I am a full-time admissions consultant, and I help people get into business school, like Nikita. Nikita, lovely to have you on.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
It's awesome. So can you start off, please, by telling us a little bit about your stats, a bit about your background, work experience, and schools you apply to?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a sheer statistics perspective, my undergraduate degree was in finance, and I graduated with a 3.9 GPA. I got a 750 on the GMAT, and my pre-MBA industry that I currently work in is professional services, and the function is specifically corporate communications, even more specifically public relations and media relations. And then in terms of what schools I applied to 7 schools round one. They were Stanford, Chicago, Northwestern, Columbia, Berkeley, Yale, and NYU.
A lot of schools. Recommenders must have loved that.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. I had some really great recommenders, so we'll always be thankful for them.
Amazing. Okay, so let's start off then, if I may. Can you talk about how you found out about admissions consulting, how we met? You got in touch via a former colleague, if I remember right.
Yeah, so actually it was someone that was in my undergraduate honors program who you worked with, and she actually did one of these videos that I'm doing now. I saw it, I reached out to her.
Do we link to her in the comments? Will she mind?
We can.
We'll link to her in the comments.
But I saw it and I reached out to her and I kind of asked her about what it was like working with a consultant and how she landed upon working with you. After which I ended up scheduling the free consultation time for the quick 30-minute introduction. And I think I went into it knowing what I wanted out of it. And it was finding someone who I liked their working style and our personalities worked well together. So kind of assess that. And to be honest, initially I was pretty hesitant about working with the consultant because I wasn't sure if it would be, I think I would say worth it. And I remember in hindsight thinking now my family kind of gave me some peace of mind and saying the money I put into it now will pay me back tenfold in the long run. And thinking about it, it isn't only going to pay me back in the long run. I'm already seeing those rewards right now in the short run. So it's definitely been worth it for me. But I do think everyone's situation is different. And working with you helped me tell a story that I was excited about and proud of. So it felt authentic and it was something I look back on and I feel like I grew from. And I think the biggest value add for me was I found that the application process was full of a lot of unknowns and questions, and there were often times where I felt very anxious. So I found it really easy to be able to reach out to you and ask those questions and have you alleviate some of those pressures so that I could really focus on showing up authentically and to the best of my capacity in my application.
Yeah, brilliant. And I take it from the t-shirt that you're wearing that you have made a final decision.
Yes. I will be going to Chicago booth. I am very excited. I'll be a part of their full-time MBA program for the class of 2025.
Absolutely amazing. And a little bit of scholarship money, I hear?
Yes. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about the offers I got. I ended up with 3 offers. I had one at NYU with full tuition and fees. My offer at Booth was about $60K a year with Forte Fellowship. And then I had an offer at Yale with $20K a year and Forte Fellowship.
Very, very nice. Very nice. How are you seeing scholarships? Now you're going into the process. What are your thoughts on scholarships and how, particularly around the flexibility that hopefully that's going to give you when you graduate?
Yeah. I think that I didn't really go into it expecting it, but it was something that I was very hopeful for, which I think everyone kind of is. Business school is expensive. I think any amount of help you can get is really valuable. But I will say, once you get an offer, that doesn't mean that your offer is final or that it isn't negotiable. Obviously, I think it's an honor to get into any MBA program. So you have to be humble when you go in with the ask, but don't be afraid to ask the admissions committee for reconsideration to maybe consider if they can give you some money or if they can match another offer. I think that's a really important piece that a lot of people are afraid to do.
Yeah. And I think the schools would echo that. The schools want to know, they really want somebody and they think there's a risk you're going to go somewhere to your second pick because financial considerations. They would like you to they'd like to say that. They'd like to be honest and say, look, I really want to come to your school, but I'd love a little bit of financial support. That's why they have scholarship money, to attract the people that they really, really like. And obviously you are one of them. That's awesome. So tell me about the application process then. So you went into this with a few notions of how you expected it to be. How did the application that you ended up submitting, or the applications, plural, that you ended up submitting, differ from what you expected from the outset?
Yeah. I had heard from a lot of people that the MBA application process was very introspective and like they came out of it knowing more about themselves. But I didn't really realize what that meant until I went through it myself. And I realized that I ended up being a lot more vulnerable than I ever expected to be. And I ended up sharing some really personal stories that I may not have ever realized I would. And like people said, I did end up learning so much more about myself along the way and how who I am personally tied back to my professional goals in the long run.
Yeah. And it's something I always drone on about in these videos, is encouraging people open up and really be personal. And I think you did a fantastic job of that. And it was an absolute pleasure to hear you talk really personally and openly and give the schools, real Nikita. It was lovely. So when you were deciding between all of these different schools, you obviously went through a hell of a lot of research. You went to events, you spoke to students. Can you talk about that process? I think it's something a lot of people don't really expect when they're applying to business school.
Yeah. I thought the big chunk of the application in terms of time was going to be spent writing essays, working on things, which is absolutely true. But I learned that to write a good essay and to know which schools are even a good fit for me, I spent a lot of time not only attending admissions events, which now in hindsight feels like a bare minimum necessity. I spent a lot of time talking to people that went to whatever schools I applied to, or even when I hadn't decided what those schools were, other schools that I was interested in, to see where I might be a good cultural fit. I found that LinkedIn was a really good resource. And one thing I'll say is, like, for me personally, what that looked like was looking at people that had MBAs from programs I was interested in that maybe had a background in communications or now work in communications. Mm-hmm. And that was a really good way for me to find a connection point on something that I felt was pretty different in my application, and ask them questions about how that experience played out at whatever business school they went to. And I would say, in terms of when I spent the time doing that research and talking to students, alum, and attending admissions events, it was largely before I started the application process, and then honestly towards the beginning as well, to kind of see what my narrative was going to be and where that school fit into it.
Yeah, because PR/comms is a fairly underrepresented field in business school land. It's not the traditional sort of the finance consulting, etc. How did you find people that were in your field, and what did they say about doing an MBA as a comms professional?
Yeah, I think it was a mixed bag. I think there were some people that weren't sure, like, oh, maybe a master's in communications is like the traditional route and you should think about doing that. But I learned that I've just seen consistently over time. I used to hear at work that having an MBA helps you build business acumen, which ultimately makes you a better communicator and better at your job. So for an example, I work a lot with my leaders on our team, and that means that I have to be able to speak the language of the C-suite. That's a skill I'm still learning, and I know going to business school is going to help me learn that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. What was the biggest surprise from the application process?
Yeah. It's funny. I feel like I kind of touched upon this earlier, but for me, it was really that unanticipated anxiety once I hit submit. And then after I walked out of an interview, I feel like I thought, and I think maybe a lot of applicants think, that once you hit submit or once you walk out of an interview, you can finally breathe. But at least for myself, I felt that like the moments, the days, the weeks following afterwards were like some of the most anxiety filled. And at that point, a lot of it is really out of your hands and you've already put your best foot forward. And that was something I had to keep reminding myself. And I also leaned on you to keep reminding me, because those were like the hardest moments, at least for me.
Yeah, sure. And I always tell people, apply to lots of schools because you want to keep yourself busy during that period. You want to keep yourself active, and rather than thinking about, oh, maybe I did something wrong, channel that energy into another school application if you can. And there's always going to be a bit of anxiety, but yeah, absolutely right. I'd like to ask you a little bit about the interview process. You've obviously had a really awesome career, and you've interviewed in lots of different sort of places and different industries. How did your MBA interviews compare to job interviews that you've had during your career?
Um, I would say they're like in some ways pretty similar. I think there's like some of those behavioral questions, just trying to see what type of cultural fit you are. And then there's also those questions where you like look back in your kit of experiences you've had at work and say, here's an example of how I work on a team, or here's an example of a challenge I faced and how I overcame it. But oftentimes the difference, I think, is the people sitting on the other side of the interview are second year students. So there's a little bit more room to like be yourself and be personal and like build a relationship with that person. Thinking specifically about my booth interview, I felt like I was just having like a fun conversation with someone I could be friends with. And it kind of felt like, in a weird way, I was interviewing someone in terms of my cultural fit into the program too. I thought the MBA interviews were fun. I really enjoyed meeting people. I felt like I got to know the programs better while I was on campus. That's kind of how the experience was for me.
Knowing you, I think interviews played right into your hands, right? Very great communicator and personable, and yeah, I'm not surprised that they worked really well for you. Okay, last question from me then. Booth. You obviously did a lot of research about lots of different schools, and you had massive scholarship offers from loads of other places, great schools, and you landed on Booth. And I'm really, I want to hear about that decision from your side. What were the factors that you really liked about Booth, so that we can shine a great light on Booth for other people who are thinking about which schools to apply to?
Yeah. When it came down to decision time for me, it was really like two factors. The first, I think, was scholarship money. That was something that I just definitely couldn't not think about, given that I had a few offers with scholarship money on the table. And the second was, I want to go to business school to grow as much as I can as a personally and professionally as a leader. So it was, where would I as an individual grow as much as possible? And I can talk a little bit more about that second piece specific to Booth. I think one is like Booth's culture speaks for itself. Every time I reached out to a student, an alum, as a prospective student, the hit rate was pretty high and how willing people were to talk to me. And now I'm experiencing that even more as a incoming student. The hit rate is like exceptional. I have reached out to so many people, and everyone's always willing to meet you in person, to get coffee, to chat with you virtually. And that's something I've really been thankful for. So the pay it forward culture definitely exists. It's really there. It's not just something they talk about. And then I think more importantly for me, it was Booth's reputation is of being a very quantitative program. And my most recent work experience for at least the past 2.5 years by the time I go into school was very communication based, writing based. And the idea of challenging myself to think differently and be around people who had different goals than me really excited me. I recognize that in an environment like that, where I'm not surrounded by people that are just like me, but are pretty different than I am, is where I would learn and grow the most. So that's why I decided to go to Booth, and I'm really, really excited about that decision.
Fantastic. I love that answer. It's so good. Okay, final question then. If you were, let's rewind a year, no, maybe GMAT, probably at 2 years. Let's rewind back right to the start of this process. If you were talking to yourself then, what advice would you give yourself? And in other words, what advice would you give to someone who's right at the start of the process?
Yeah, I actually talked to someone like a few days ago that is like just now considering maybe I'm going to think about doing an MBA. I think I have a few pieces of advice. I think there were moments along the way where I felt discouraged by someone I talked to, and that to me felt like a step back. And I don't want anyone else to ever feel that way when they're going through the process, because there is a program and a school and an opportunity that is right for everyone if that's what they really want to do. So really, like, when people discourage you, like, whatever, it's fine. You're going to find something, and it doesn't matter what other people say. Believe in yourself, put your best foot forward, and something will work out. I think the second piece would be to take it like one step at a time. I feel like oftentimes I found myself like pre-GMAT, I was like, okay, but the application process is going to be so hard. And then during applications, I was like, oh my God, I need to rush and start prepping for interviews. And then after interviews, I was always like thinking about the next thing constantly. So I think taking a step back and just like slowing down and doing it one bite-sized piece at a time would have done me a lot of benefit in the past and saved me a lot of unneeded stress and anxiety. So I don't know. I feel like the process, I grew a lot as a person, and that I wish I had spent it slowing down and enjoying it a little bit more.
Yeah. It's easy to say when you've got a load of offers in the bag. Fantastic. Nikita, thank you so much for your time. I'm really, really grateful. And yeah, I've said it before, I'll say it again. It was an absolute pleasure working with you. It really, really, really was. From everything from the way that you opened up about your personal experience to the way that you worked and the diligence that you showed. It was an absolute pleasure. So thank you so, so much. And have fun at booth.
Thank you. And it was a pleasure working with you too. So thanks for all your help.
Awesome. Lovely. Have a great evening.